I trusted my grandson with everything I had, and by the end of that winter, I was sleeping in my truck behind a church, wondering how a life could fall apart so completely. The morning it all began was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a warning. Frost clung to the grass outside. My coffee sat cooling on the kitchen table, and my wife's picture stared at me from its usual spot. I used to talk to that picture while I drank my coffee, telling her what the day would hold, pretending she was still there to hear it. That morning I didn't say anything. I just stared until the knock on the door broke the silence. Jason stood there, grinning like the little boy who used to run to me with skinned knees and handfuls of worms after a rainstorm. He looked excited, almost too excited, like someone with a secret too big to hold in. "Grandpa," he said, stepping inside and stamping the cold off his shoes. "I found something that's going to change everything for you." He sat down without waiting for an invitation, already pulling out his phone. He showed me charts, graphs, government seals. "This is a senior investment program," he said quickly. "It's safe, government-backed, guaranteed. You just put in what you have and it doubles in 12 months. No risk." I laughed softly. "Jason, I'm not looking to get rich. I just need to pay bills and keep the lights on." He leaned forward, voice dropping to that serious tone that used to melt me when he was little. "Grandpa, I owe you everything. You raised me when no one else was around. You paid for my school, you taught me how to drive, you made sure I never went hungry. Let me take care of you now. Please, you won't have to worry anymore." And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this boy I'd poured my life into was finally standing tall enough to take some of the weight off my shoulders. I signed the papers he put in front of me. We went to the bank that afternoon, and I withdrew everything. The pension, the little savings account I'd been building since before Jason was born, even the envelope of cash I'd been keeping for emergencies and for my own funeral someday. The teller looked at me a little too long before she slid the cashier's check across the counter, but she didn't say a word. Jason held the check like it was a golden ticket, folded it neatly, slipped it into his pocket, and put a hand on my shoulder. "This will change your life," he said. 2 weeks later, my account was empty. The number on the screen was 0. Jason stopped answering calls. His apartment was empty, stripped bare, just a rectangle of clean wall where his TV had been and a crooked nail sticking out like an accusation. The neighbor said he'd left in the middle of the night with 2 men and a duffel bag, looking scared. Then came the letter from the mortgage company, talking about payments due on a loan I hadn't taken. I sat at the table all day staring at it, staring at the walls, trying to breathe. Jason had used the power of attorney he'd slipped into that folder to take out a loan against my house. By the end of the month, the house wasn't mine anymore. I packed one box, my tools, the photo album, my wife's blanket, and a pair of boots. Everything else stayed where it was for strangers to sort through. The bank posted a foreclosure notice on the door like a death certificate. The first night, I parked behind the church. It rained. The leak in the roof of the truck dripped cold water down the back of my neck. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and stared at the ceiling of the cab until dawn. The next morning, I showered at the community center, standing under the timer-controlled spray until it cut off and left me with soap still in my hair. I ate soup at the shelter, thin and lukewarm, and stale bread that scraped the roof of my mouth. The volunteers asked if I had family I could call. I said no. Every day felt like a copy of the one before. Wake up stiff and cold, drive nowhere, sit until sitting hurt more than standing, watch people pass and wonder if they knew I used to have a home. A week later, I found a note under my windshield wiper. "Come see me." It was signed by Pastor Lee. He was a small man with a quiet voice that could make bad news sound like a prayer. He gave me work, sweeping floors, stacking chairs, mowing the strip of grass behind the church. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me feel like maybe I hadn't completely vanished. After a month, the pastor found me a trailer to rent behind the church. It leaned a little to one side. The heater rattled like an old cricket, and it smelled of dust and wet carpet. But it was 4 walls, a roof I could call mine, and a door I could close. At night, I lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, hearing my wife's voice in the silence. She used to say forgiveness is a bridge you build when you're ready to cross it. I wasn't ready. I thought of Jason's first fishing trip, the way he'd squealed when he caught a tiny bluegill, his face full of pride. I thought of every Christmas morning, every scraped knuckle from extra shifts I worked just to make sure he had gifts under the tree. And now, he'd sold the roof over my head. I went to the police, filed a report. The officer typed slowly, carefully, and told me since I'd signed the papers it might be a civil matter. I called lawyers. Most didn't call back. The one who did said it could take years to fight, and by the time it was over, I'd likely spend everything I had left on court fees. Winter came early that year. Snow turned the trailer park quiet, muffling every sound until I felt like I was living inside a held breath. I split wood for the church's stove, sold scrap metal I found along the road, carved little wooden birds to sell at the farmer's market. Slowly, people in town started nodding to me again, as if I'd earned back the right to exist. Then one evening, months later, I saw Jason. I was sweeping the church steps when he appeared at the end of the drive. He looked thinner, older, his eyes hollowed out by something I couldn't name. He stopped a few feet away, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. "Grandpa," he said. I didn't answer. He came closer, hands out like a man approaching a wild animal. "I'm sorry," he said. I leaned on the broom. "Do you know where I've been sleeping?" He nodded. "I had no choice," he said quickly. "I owed people money. They were going to hurt me. I had to get it from somewhere." "You got it from me," I said. Tears filled his eyes. "I'll pay you back. I swear. Just give me time." I looked at him a long moment. "I had time, Jason. I spent it raising you." He asked if he could stay with me. I told him no. That night I sat on the porch of the trailer, listening to snow slide off the roof, thinking about my wife. I could almost hear her laugh, see her brushing flour off her apron. Forgiveness might come someday, but not that night. I kept living. I fixed the roof with scraps from the lumber yard, built a bench from leftover boards, planted a small garden behind the trailer when spring came. Every evening I sat on that bench, saying my wife's name like a prayer. Months passed before Jason came again. He looked worse this time, shaking like a man coming off something. He handed me a crumpled envelope with a few bills inside. "It's not much," he said, "but it's a start." I didn't count it. "You need to get clean," I said. "Fix your life. Then maybe we'll talk." That summer, I worked every day until my hands blistered. The garden grew tall, the tomatoes red and heavy on the vine. The trailer stopped smelling like loss and started smelling like sawdust, wood polish, and fresh bread. Neighbors started asking me for help, to fix a porch step, to change a tire. And I started laughing again, small laughs at first, the kind that sneak out when you aren't paying attention. Jason took my money, my house, and the years I thought I had left. But he didn't take the will that keeps me alive. I sit here now, on the bench with my wife's name carved into it, watching the last light of day fade behind the trees. Maybe one day I'll build that bridge of forgiveness she always talked about. But not yet. Tonight, I just breathe. The summer passed. Then autumn came with its quiet golden evenings. The garden turned from green to brittle brown. I harvested the last tomatoes, simmered them into sauce, and filled 3 old jars. I lined them up on the shelf like trophies, proof that I had managed to make something grow again, even after everything had been taken from me. But nights were still hard. When the wind rattled the windows, I heard echoes of my wife's laugh, her footsteps across the old house, Jason's voice when he was a boy asking for one more story before bed. Memory is cruel like that. It only gives you the warm parts when you're sitting in the cold. One night, just after the first frost, there was a knock at my door. Slow, hesitant, almost ashamed. I opened it, and Jason stood there again, thinner than before, cheeks hollow, eyes bloodshot. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "I got a job. Day labor, construction. I've been clean 3 months." I let him stand there in the cold while I decided whether to believe him. His hands shook, not from drugs this time, but from the chill. I stepped aside. He sat at the table, the same table I had brought from the house before the bank took it, the one I had refinished myself. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I know I can't make it right." I didn't know where else to go. I nodded. You can't stay, I said softly. He swallowed. I know. I just needed to see you. He took something from his pocket. A small box, cheap cardboard, scuffed from being carried too long. Inside was my wedding ring. I pawned it, he admitted, tears sliding down his face. But I got it back. I wanted you to have it. I stared at the ring for a long time. The gold was scratched, but the engraving inside was still there. Always, M. I slid it onto my finger, and for a moment it was like she was sitting across from me again, shaking her head, smiling that sad smile she used to save for moments when life had been unfair but not unfixable. You should go, I said. He nodded and stood. At the door he turned back. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said. Just don't give up on me yet. When he left, I sat at the table with the ring shining dully in the lamplight. For the first time since it all happened, I cried, not angry tears this time, but something softer, like grief finally had somewhere to go. Over the next months, I saw Jason a few times. He never came asking for money. Sometimes he just stood by the fence while I worked in the garden. Sometimes he'd bring groceries from the discount store and leave them on the porch without knocking. Slowly, I started letting him stay a little longer. I taught him how to patch the shed roof. We repaired the porch steps together. He didn't talk much, but his hands worked steady. Winter came again, but this time the trailer was warm. Jason brought firewood every other week. One night, as the snow piled against the door, he asked if he could stay for dinner. I said yes. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "Do you ever wish Grandma could see you now?" "All the time," I said, "but I think she can." Jason nodded, staring into his plate. "I think she can too." When he left that night, he said, "I'm going to make this right, Grandpa, however long it takes." I didn't answer, but I watched his taillights disappear down the road and realized for the first time in a long time that I wasn't angry anymore, just tired and maybe a little hopeful. Spring came again. I planted new seeds, this time with Jason's help. We worked in silence, side by side, the way men do when words aren't enough. By summer, the garden was fuller than ever, green and alive, buzzing with bees. One evening Jason came by with a paper in his hand, proof that he had paid off the first chunk of the loan he had taken in my name. It wasn't much, but it was real. He looked at me, waiting. "That's a start," I said. That night I sat on the bench with my wife's name carved into it, the ring heavy on my finger, the smell of tomato vines thick in the air. The world still wasn't fair. But maybe, just maybe, it was beginning to be livable again. A few weeks later, a letter came from the county clerk's office. I almost threw it away, thinking it was just another reminder of debts I no longer had the strength to pay. But when I opened it, I saw that the fraud case I had filed months ago had finally been reviewed. They were requesting my presence in court to testify about what happened. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to open those wounds again. But that night, sitting on the porch with the air warm and buzzing with crickets, I felt my wife's ring press into my finger like a gentle push. She would have told me to fight, not for revenge, but for the truth. Jason drove me to the courthouse. He sat in the back, quiet, hands folded like a schoolboy waiting to be called on. When the judge asked me to speak, I told everything. How I had trusted Jason, how I had signed the papers, how I had slept in my truck through winter nights when I should have been safe in my own bed. When it was Jason's turn, he didn't make excuses this time. His voice shook as he admitted what he had done, why he had done it, how far he had fallen. He said he wasn't there to defend himself, just to make sure I got back what I could. The judge ruled that most of the fraudulent transactions would be reversed. I wouldn't get the house back. It had already been resold, but I would get a settlement large enough to pay off my debts and make the trailer fully mine. Driving back from court, Jason asked quietly, "Do you hate me?" I thought for a long time. The road stretched out in front of us, golden with evening light. "No," I said finally. "I hate what you did, but not you." He nodded and kept driving. That night, I sat on the bench and watched the sky go purple. The air smelled of cut grass and rain. For the first time since I lost everything, I felt something like peace settling over me, not because the past had been fixed, but because the future had somewhere to start.